Good evening. Welcome to DiversiTV. I'm Mark Harris, and I'll introduce our guest for tonight shortly. If you're new to DiversiTV, we are a weekly interview show coming out of Lane Community College that focuses on issues of diversity, and under that general rubric of diversity. So if you are new to us, welcome. If you are part of our growing legion of viewers, welcome back. I know that in addition to what's going out live, we will also have been picked up by Oregon Public Broadcasting, so this show will be seen widely. DiversiTV's mission basically follows along the idea that we illuminate daily, everyday diversity issues and give the mic and the camera to those who don't always get it. And to that end, we basically have follow a schedule that starts with a Native perspective, an Anglo perspective, Asian American we did last week, Latino perspective this week, African American perspective, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer questioning, two-spirit perspective in May, youth perspective, a class, spirituality, religion, and we may have a lanyap, a little something extra show on June 10th. We haven't booked that. So this schedule is the one that we follow roughly depending on guest availability. Because I'm a practitioner, an addictions practitioner in this state, and often have done issues in terms of looking at cultural modes of healing, when I created a workshop basically that talked about African-centered reality therapy, one of the things that we focused on was recreating a vital and viable being. So Dr. Eduardo Duran, in his book, The Spirit of Alcohol and Addictions, with a special section for veterans, you can get it on Amazon, basically talked about from the point of view, an indigenous point of view, and it's also an indigenous African point of view, with the substances you take, you partake in the entire process of manufacturing the particular dose of the drug that you're taking, and indeed, you participate in the entire history of that drug. So, for example, if your drug is methamphetamine, then that drug was used for soldiers in war to enable them to rape and kill, feel good while doing it, and not feel anything about it afterwards, and indeed not even remember their acts while on the drug. So when we see that kind of cruel history reenacted upon children and upon addicts in our community every day, that becomes particularly telling. So in the metaphor of the ivory tower, because we're in academe here, an ivory tower is built on the death of whales and elephants. Both are sources of ivory, because ivory doesn't grow as a vegetable, right? So those who dive deep, the whales, and those who are patient and never forget. So in that sense, then, the ivory tower is built on disconnecting you from yourself and the pain that it caused in that disconnection. So often we are traumatized as part of the process of gaining our degrees, and we often forget this, especially when we're dealing with students who are kind of traumatized, by our very processes of education. So this ivory tower system kind of teaches you to anesthetize yourself instead of feeling, acknowledging, and healing your pain. So, for example, as a substance abuse counselor working in academia, I notice with this cultural tradition of academe, there's an 800-year history of alcohol abuse and college in the European mode of college, right? That went virtually unexamined until Ronald Reagan created the modern prevention system in the 80s during his presidency. So the pyramids, as another set of organizing principles around how you teach people, were built on connecting you to yourself, and the organizing principle was knowing thyself and staying connected. So to quote Alice Walker from her latest book, "We are the people we've been waiting for." Underneath what is labeled racism or sexism or casteism, these are sources of trauma, there lurk covetousness, envy, and greed. All these human states can, through practice, be worked with and transformed. That is equally good news for us and our oppressors. We can turn our attention away from our oppressors, unless they are in our face directly endangering us, and work on the issue of our suffering without attaching them to it and us. She continues, the teaching that supports this idea is this. Suppose someone shot you with an arrow right in the heart. Would you spend your time screaming at the archer or even trying to locate him? Or would you try and pull the arrow out of your heart? And she goes on, white racism, that is to say, envy, covetousness, and greed, incredible sloth and laziness in terms of enslaving others to work for you, is the arrow that has pierced our collective heart. So she's talking about people of color in general, but African Indians in particular. Right. For centuries, we've tried to get the white archer even to notice where his arrow has landed, to connect himself even for a moment to what he has done. Maybe even to consider apologizing, which he hates to do, to make reparations, which he considers absurd. This teaching says, enough. Screaming at the archer is a sure way to remain attached to your suffering rather than easing or eliminating it. A better way is to learn through meditation, through study and practice, a way to free yourself from the pain of being shot, no matter who the archer may be, because indeed sometimes the archer is us.
That's right.
To deal with that pain is also to become part of a community of suffering, which teaches you to create a place within you. This place, Alice goes on, this place of peace, of serenity, and gratitude does exist. It is available to all. In a way, this place of quiet and peacefulness could be said to be our shadow, our deserved shadow, our African Amerindian shadow. In European thought, the shadow is rarely understood as positive because it is dark, because it is frequently behind us, because we cannot see it. But for us, African Indians and others, ultra-sensitive to the blinding glare of racism and suffering daily the searing effects of incomprehensible behavior, our shadow of peace that we rarely see can be thought of as a welcoming shade from that glare, the shade of an internal tree, a tree that grows beside an internal river that bathes us in peace. Meditation is the path that leads to this internal glade. So we come to our guest and this very cool graphic from the website of the place that she works from, the Trauma Healing Project at www.healingattention.org, from their mission statement. As human beings, we may be harmed or injured in many different ways through accident, violence, abuse, natural disaster, or oppression. Trauma, quote unquote, is both the injury itself, ergo head trauma or rape, as well as the longer-term impact of the experience or experiences that result from the trauma. Trauma can be sustained through a single incident, multiple or even chronic experiences. Some trauma is intentional, rape, domestic violence, war, and some is not. Some forms of trauma are experienced collectively, ergo war, racism, famine, natural disaster, and some are individual. In all cases, appropriate care and attention are critical to healing and recovery for individuals, family members, and communities. The mission of the Trauma Healing Project is to ensure any person or group in our community impacted by violence or other trauma will be supported to completely recover and heal. Care and attention will be delivered and provided in ways that are culturally, developmentally, and gender appropriate. Strength and empowerment-based and respectful and effective. This includes healing support for caregivers. Our guiding principles are safety, immediate and long-term, emotional and physical. Healing, therapeutic, strength-based and effective. Liberation, empowerment-focused, partnership models. Justice, prevention, intervention, and social change. So our guest tonight, welcome, Patricia Cortez from the Trauma Healing Project.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, it's a lot of information what you just give. So I'm just still trying to wrap around and get away from my own experience that remind me some of the pieces that you were speaking about, and just focusing on, you know, the guiding principles that the trauma healing have come up with, which I feel very honored and also hopeful, not for myself as a trauma survivor, but, you know, for a community that have suffered this over and over again. Mm-hmm. So thank you for the opportunity to share some of those thoughts and some of my experience coming into this country and being a professional in this community. Mm. So,
where are you from?
Well, I'm from El Salvador.
Okay. All right.
Yes. And I came to this country in '85. So I was fleeing the Civil War in El Salvador. And I was in a very different shape, you know. I was very hurt. I was very angry. I was very confused. And I never thought that I was going to see this country as a place of safety.
Given that, you're from El Salvador, and this country basically has been responsible for some of the things you've experienced.
That's right.
Whether you all know the history or not, it's definitely true.
Yep, so. Absolutely.
So how did you come to Eugene? Because, you know, as places of safety for people of color, you know, especially experiencing, you know, attempted genocide or whatever, this place already has its own hidden history, as we were talking about this morning in the workshop with James Lowen. Lies My Teacher Told Me, the guy who wrote that. And he was talking about sundown towns and basically talking about the hidden history of racism that's even in this state, where I think he talked about 50 towns that basically follow the dictum of, you know, if you're a person of color, then you can't be inside the city limits after dark. And you know, they could enforce that in various ways. So why come to Eugene? Well,
I'm one of those who, you know, once it hit dark, I'm going home. I have some experience about that, and but also just because it made me nervous about it. So, but going back to your question, how did I came here? In '85, I arrived to California. I was in Pasadena and North Hollywood, and, you know, different places around South California. And then I moved to San Francisco after 3 years in the South. And I basically moved to San Francisco in search of work. I got to the point in California that it was a lot of competition for work. And even though, you know, I love to see my reflection of many others, I have to sacrifice that in the search of economics.
Yes, right.
I'm responsible for my parents, not because they tell me so, but because, you know, it's part of my heritage.
Yes.
And so I have to make sure that every month I be able to pay for my bills here and also send some to my parents so they can support themselves back in El Salvador. And so I was in San Francisco for 11 years. You know, I have some very difficult experiences there. From South California, I have saved up some money enough to live, you know, like 3 months. I figure in the time that I find job and all that, well, the money, you know, was gone. I used it really quickly, and I find myself not employed. And so I start to find other ways of survival. And, you know, if you're from El Salvador, you know what those are. and I have a lot of practice. You know, I'm coming from a very poor family, and so I have a lot of practice, you know, singing in the buses for some spare change, or shoe polish on the street for a couple bucks, and so on. So I went back to my basics, what I know best, and I would stand up in the corner of the streets and trying to clean up people's windshields and, you know, so forth. And so quickly to discover that that was unacceptable. And so I stayed there. I find jobs in all kinds of industries. You know, I work in construction. I did house cleaning. I did pet sitters. I sit babysitter. I work in some fast food places, and then after 11 years, I start getting really sad and missing home, homesick.
Yeah.
And so I started to decide what I wanted to do with my life here. And so by then I have achieved my permanent residency. I applied for political asylum, and, you know, thanks that it was granted, or else I would not be here.
Yes, right.
And so the life in San Francisco became too fast and too complicated for me. Rent became too expensive, and so on. So, but the major motivator was that I was homesick. And so I started talking, I fell in love. So that's the greatest thing that happened in San Francisco. And I started talking to my partner about Oregon. You know, one time she had been in the down the coast, and she was telling me how beautiful the trees, and, you know, that everything, river and the mountain and the ocean, how everything was in the proximity, and it sounded fantastic to me. I never been at this point, and you know, parallel to having this conversation with my partner, I have some former employers moving down here. And so, and they wanted somebody to do a house sitter for them. And so I stay in their house. And once they transitioned, did the move from there to here, they invite me over. And so that was the opportunity to come and see this place for myself. And for me, it was like falling in love again, you know, because even though the temperature is not the same as El Salvador.
Or even San Francisco.
Or even San Francisco,
Right.
That's right. And so, but the trees, you know, the trees and the green, and just certain, the nature that is surrounded, you know, I just love that. And it reminds me so much of El Salvador and places that I grew up, that I decided that this was it, that I wanted to live here. So I went back to California, and my partner and I make plans to come back a year later, and we did.
Okay.
And so I came here in '97. Yeah.
So how did you come to the Trauma Healing Project?
Well, that's that's one of the projects that I've been part of for about 5 years now. And I came into the project a year after they started. Is the vision of this woman, Elaine Walter, and I guess along the line she started talking to some friends in the community about this idea, and so more people got excited about it, and then they decided to launch the project. And how it started was with the series of cohort that will go through a whole year of training, you know, to prepare people in the community to support survivors of trauma. Okay. And so I was hesitant, okay.
Being a survivor of trauma yourself, yeah.
Yes. And so, you know, this is not a secret. I have talked about my hesitation for a year because I have seen so many projects, and I'm really good at picking up similarities and intentions and, you know, that kind of stuff. And so I went through the year training, and I really like it. They have some very respectful people come in to teach us. You know, Sandra Bloom was here, and she presented on the sanctuary method to address trauma, and I really like it, you know, because it's a practice, the way she put it, is a practice that includes the whole community and not just the individual. And it stays away from the blame and the demeanor and, you know, all this unrealistic perspectives that people think of trauma survivors. And so I like that. There was also this man who I really respect his work, Paul Cavell, and he's based also in Oakland, California, and the
Undoing Racism guy, I think, right?
Yes.
Yes, right. I met him. Yeah.
Yes. So, you know, I like his work, and he was here. And there were also groups in the community like Mind Freedom group.
Mind Freedom, yeah.
Yep. And there was also some, you know, some individuals who have gone through trauma and have recovered from trauma and have moved on to be whoever they want to be. And so I got to learn about all these cool people. There was another woman, Patty Whiff, I think is her name, and her approach was, you know, families and parenting, and they all have consistencies in terms of liberation and justice and oppression. And so I really like that. That was different this time,
right,
from other, you know, projects that I have seen come and go.
That don't really talk about that.
Right.
I mean, the liberation and basically the social justice thing that are your guiding principles. I mean,
yes,
that becomes really a critical piece because certainly, you know, because we both work for or worked with a number of agencies, and
correct,
so because of the hidden history that has traumatized a lot of folks, just here, as well as that has become the norm in all kinds of what is referred to not as the third world, but also was fairly common here. Right. So I certainly remember talking about with this particular agency that shall remain unnamed, but basically I was, you know, talking with one of the staff people, and I mentioned that you had to understand the common experiences of a community to really do effective healing work with them. And so I mentioned Emmett Till, and the person, you know, happened to be Caucasian, said,
"Imagine that."
Who's Emmett Till? And I said, Emmett Till was this kid who was lynched for whistling at a white woman in the 50s. And she said, that didn't happen. You're making that up. And I'm going, wait a minute, this is history. This is like, there's a trial and everything. The kid's murderers got acquitted. They admitted doing it, and they got acquitted by an all-white jury. You know, there's actually a television show airing at the time that we were having that conversation on PBS, The Untold Story of Emmett Till. So, I mean, for someone to say, well, that couldn't happen. You know, getting lynched for whistling at a white woman, no, that didn't happen. Yeah. Like, wow. Okay, so this is why at your agency, when an African-American, you know, trainee says, you know, don't use the term tar baby because that's offensive to African-Americans,
right.
You know, and the therapist says, oh, well, my dictionary says it just means an emotionally sticky situation, you know, and every African-American, of course, says, what? The white dictionary says it's an emotionally sticky. How do you not know that, you know, that is an ethnic slur? I mean, Toni Morrison, I mean, you know, why can't you just believe this woman saying it's an ethnic slur and let it go at that? Why can't you believe, you know, the historical fact of that lynching happened, you know, and in this southern state in the Northwest? You know, I mean, lynching happened here in Eugene, so, you know, we really, you know, don't face that. So when you have very common experiences of torture, state-sponsored torture, et cetera, people were actually trained here in the United States to do what they did. You know, I mean, you don't have to reveal your history, but I mean, it's a fact.
Yeah.
It's a fact. You know, the torturers were trained by the United States
Whether they
government.
changed names to the establishment, it's still the same.
It's still the same.
Yeah.
Right. So not only that, but, you know, people are living lives, everyday lives here in America where they live in fear and they're traumatized and re-traumatized. And so, you know, when we look at, well, first acknowledging that happened, and then how do you begin to heal from that? If I may ask you, what are your bloodlines?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Well, my my ancestors, you know, my grandma, she is a mix of indigenous with the conquistador. So it took me a while, you know, maybe in my teenagers, to find out what that meant.
Yes.
And it was shocking to me because prior to my discovery, you know, I said it in only exclusive circles because in other circles was dangerous. But I remember the taste of it. Saying it changed after I find out, you know, the history behind that mixture of those two groups. So, and my grandma's grandma, she is Pipil, which is the Aborigines for El Salvador. Very small tribe. What I know now is that they descendants of the Mayas. And then they was, you know, the Mayas were travelers. They were all over. And this group stayed settled in El Salvador. And so they were these two tribes. And my grandma's grandma fell in love with a member of the enemy tribe. And so they were they were kicked out of the clan. And so my grandma had to be displaced from that place, running away from that kind of trauma, and start, you know, working in the city. So, and then in there, what I find out is that the history repeated. And so my grandma was a housemaid for this rich family, and so, you know, she became involved with one of the sons in the family, and my mom came to be. So I have
history repeats itself. It's in the blood. Yes.
So, you know, it's very familiar because that's what we know about generational trauma.
Yes, right.
Okay. And then, you know, the piece, each piece, I'm just summarizing things for the sake of time, but, you know, every single piece is, if we look at the history, have a lot of trauma and oppression and the idea of one being better than the other and always the lighter, you know, press the...
Right, blancos as opposed to mestizos, as opposed to moreños or zambos, or, yeah, whatever it is. You know, because, you know, when you mentioned, you know, you couldn't talk about being indigenous because, you know, many times there was a kill on sight policy with the conquistadors as well as the settlers in this country, definitely. And so, you know, giving you know, a place of refuge. I mean, that's what Alice was talking about in terms of, okay, our African Amerindian roots. You know, we gave each other shelter, you know, from a mutual oppressor, even though we were also pitted against each other at the same time. So this multi-generational trauma that I've basically heard talked about in terms of you know, practitioners of color basically saying, yeah, well, of course that got passed on, and of course this has been happening for generations and generations, and you have to be able to acknowledge it. And the reason for bringing up the bloodline piece is because that, you know, I noticed in the mission statement that you talked about within that agency, which I can understand why you get drawn to it, you know, when it talked about things being culturally appropriate and gender appropriate. So what are your culturally appropriate ways of coping or healing from trauma?
Well, you know, personally, people of El Salvador, we laugh about our misery. So we have learned to survive, you know, by making fun of. Okay.
Laughing to keep from crying.
Yes.
As it were. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, in a sense. And then, you know, because here's is when everything start getting mixed, right? So for me personally, the years that I was growing up, you know, the Civil War did not started 150 years ago. It started, you know, way before that. And so I remember growing up and you know, all of a sudden, at any moment of the day or night, you know, there will be this bang, and then you can hear the, you know, just killings and planes flying around. And so I remember that I will go to sleep, you know, purposely. Just go to sleep, because the idea was that if I go to sleep, I would not experience all this, and then I will wake up and it will be a new day, you know, maybe with...
Hopefully,
with a lot of bodies on the streets and, you know, people crying about neighbors and relatives and so forth. But that was one of the ways that I still do. I still do that.
Yeah. Things
got difficult for me, and I go to sleep, you know? And freak people out, you know, because they accustomed to think of things in just one way and not, you know, multiple ways.
Yes.
And so they associate, well, she's sleeping, maybe she's depressed, maybe she's suicidal, and I'm fine, you know, I'm just taking care of myself.
Well, yeah, that was a survival mode that worked, you know.
Yes.
So, I mean, when you talk about, you know, one of your responses to trauma is, you know, to laugh about it, right? And so from a certain point of view, that would be inappropriate, or they would think it's inappropriate, but certainly...
keeps me alive.
Well, I mean, and not just you, and basically for people, you know, I mean, to tell the story, for example, there was a group of African-American students in Oakland, California, who, without any contextualizing about World War II, the Holocaust, Hitler, or anything like that, were shown the movie Schindler's List. And so the teacher just showed them the movie, just said it was a Steven Spielberg movie and no other context about the Holocaust, nothing. So they saw the movie and there were sections in it where they laughed. Like, for example, there's a section in the movie where this Jewish woman who's an architect, they're building, latrines. And she's saying the foundation's off, you can't, if you build this, it'll collapse. And so, the Nazi officer gets frustrated with her and, shoots her in the head, right? And so the kid saw that and laughed, right? And so this got kind of blown out of proportion as an example of, black anti-Semitism, et cetera, et cetera. So they basically arranged to have Steven Spielberg come up and show the film again and do a question and answer session, right? And so, in the question and answer section, this black girl stood up and said, thank you for coming, but, people blew this out of proportion. Here's why we laughed. Many of us have seen our friends shot to death in front of us. Okay? Lots of times, multiple times, and your movie looked fake. That's why we laughed. It looked fake. Not because, we were glad that, she got killed. It looked fake.
Right.
Fake. So that's why we laughed. And also, aren't you the same Steven Spielberg that had the Indiana Jones movies? Because all we weren't told about the Holocaust. We were just told it was a Steven Spielberg movie. And so the Indiana Jones movies where, Indiana is confronted with the swordsman, he pulls out the gun, boom, ha, 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 that's funny. And then in the second movie, same situation, except he's without a gun, and it's a comedic movement. Aren't you that same Steven Spielberg where somebody gets killed or shot and it's funny? So we just saw that in the movie and thought we were supposed to laugh because it also looked fake to us. Ooh.
Yeah.
Right? So, some people might think it's inappropriate, but sometimes people's response is not so much to make light of it, but it's a way of coping.
Right.
It's a way of coping. So,
and we need a lot of that because there's a lot of, hidden symbolism in the language and the movies that we see and a lot of things. And many times people are aware or not aware. I don't know because I can't be in their shoes, but I know that it hurts.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. And certainly, seeing the news, seeing movies, seeing all kinds of things that kind of, this language that we have in the whole counseling world about triggers and, flashbacks and PTSD. So, PTSD happening to an individual, multi-generational trauma happening to people. So it's kind of like experiencing multi-generational trauma. It might not have happened to you personally, but you feel it as if it did. And, that's real. We're not making it up. So how is it being a practitioner of color in this community? Do you ever feel supported or have you experienced trauma working for mainstream agencies? You don't have to name the agencies.
Yeah. Well, it's tough. It's like being in a place that you're not welcome and not having friends. So, no, I don't feel supported. No, I don't feel valued. Yes, I feel misunderstood. It's really hard to do my work the way I know it and the way that I being told that is helpful because there's so many ways to do the practice, and so and my way is that you know better what you need. And
the person who needs the healing.
Yes. And so I ask and I trust that what they say they need is what they need. And so, but in the mental health, there's so many limitations. I mean, it's an oppressive system, from the very beginning, label, the people experience, even though there's, argument that for some people is helpful, that normalizes what happened to them and put a name to their experience and so forth.
Maybe.
Not in all the cases.
Yeah, not in all the cases. I mean, I'm a practitioner, right? So, you have to accept the DSM, right? Because we're working in the field and you have to call it something.
Yeah.
Right? So labels are useful in terms of categorizing things, but it doesn't necessarily give you the mode of healing.
Yeah.
It describes the problem without giving you the solution, or the solution's a pill. Yeah. Instead of, talking out the problem, or allowing the person's healing to emerge from them in terms of being responsive to their needs. I mean, it's kind of like, where is the agency? I mean, the ability to act towards your healing placed when you get a diagnosis.
Right. And I will say that, more half of the time I'm spending time fighting the rules and the limitations of the workplace, that spending the energy and the time on the person.
Can you give an example of that? Because I think it's useful to illuminate that. Yes.
For example, there's millions of people who don't qualify for OHP, the Oregon Health Plan.
Right.
Okay. So,
good example.
Are they exempt of having, depression or anxiety and all those things? Of course not.
Right.
Okay. Right. So they come and because they need help. Okay. They recognize that they need help, or somebody is referring them. So recently, in the last 2 years, I will say, there have been this pool of money called the indigent funds. Okay, and so some people have benefit from using that pool of money. Well, that pool of money is gone.
Right.
Okay.
And the need hasn't disappeared.
And the need hasn't disappeared. So what do? I have obligations to the agency. I have obligation to myself. I have obligation to my sisters and brothers. And I have, ethical and moral obligations to them. Do I pull out services because they're no longer able to pay? Do I go and advocate to get more fundings? Do I go and tell the person, this is the situation, how can we solve this together? Are you willing to write a letter or request this, or, there's different approach to do it. And so, finding the solution, going back to my original point, I'm not paying attention to what is happening in this person's life at this moment.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to solve how am I going to provide the services, rather than what is useful for you right now.
I'm often in that dilemma, especially here at Lane, doing in a program where basically the only way you can see me is if you qualify for financial aid, or you can pay for a class, or you're related to someone who does that. That's the only way you get to see me, and I know that there's a tremendous need out there. Right. And certainly, since higher education itself wasn't necessarily designed to do treatment, so many of the counselors, even if they do have the skills, there's such a tremendous need out there, we're not able to see everybody. And so the thing that I've found that I've been struggling with is having to refer people to services I already know are inadequate. And they're the only services available. Yeah. So, just to put that on Front Street. Yeah. And I will say this because I've gone on record in some of my writings that have been published in the Eugene Weekly, and it's still true. And so the central statement was this in this piece called Mandatory Reporter. I am a mandatory reporter for a system that I would not trust a single blood relative to. Okay, and that is still true.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have to go on record as saying, at least in Eugene, if you're a person of color with these kind of problems, there are very few agencies, if nearly none, that I would feel comfortable referring you to. Now, based on their track record, even as of last week. Now, there are some, in Portland, where, it's predominantly staff of color that are providing services not only to people of color, but also to, white, clients, because that's a reality of being a person of color as a practitioner in this state. You do not have the option of being culturally incompetent with white people. You simply do not.
Right.
You have to provide good services to them, right? So, but we find, that's one of the frustrations as practitioners. There's no reciprocity.
No.
So, in terms of cultural competency with people of color, with our white clients, and not only white clients, but white, fellow practitioners. So, that's part of the difficulty in, dealing with, this particular set of circumstances, because people get re-traumatized. Or their health problems or their mental health problems get treated as criminal matters, whether or not they've committed crimes, and, sometimes they have. Let's, be true about that. But, if it is a medical problem because you're robbing houses because of your addiction, you need to have addiction treatment. And we find that basically gets bifurcated in terms of race, where you may, your addiction problem might not be seen as an addiction problem, might be seen as criminal because of your suntan.
Right.
So trying to negotiate that, where, you basically talk to your client and you're trying to provide services and trying to have them negotiate a sometimes hostile situation is often difficult.
Oh, yes.
So how do you find a way to work around that? Or
I take deep breath. There's some days I feel that I win little battles, and sometimes I don't. And so I just walk around with this heaviness some days that there's not much I can do. And and to this reality on my face that good enough is not enough, and some days, I just cry. I just cry because there's no other way. There's no solution. There's no resources, just like you say, and and there's. The ladder is pretty tall,
yes.
And those on the bottom, are wham after wham after wham, and so it's hard.
Yes.
It's hard because just putting degrees to pain is not okay, and so.
Meaning we're only going to serve you if you have this degree of pain, and if you go beyond that, or if you don't meet that need, or whatever, or you don't display it, we're not going to help you. Yeah. Often, and the reason I asked about the bloodlines in the indigenous piece is, I guess one of my favorite metaphors is, the cavalry ain't coming to rescue you, and if the cavalry does come, they ain't coming to rescue you. They're coming to rescue the settlers. So you best to make friends with the Indians, or become indigenous yourself, and basically depend on your own inner resources. That's one of the things that I find, falling back on, if healing comes from the client, and basically they can tell you, as you say, what they need, and trust that, then how do you bring that out? Because sometimes, tears are a powerful healing mode, but also empowerment is as well. So how do you find you lead them to those sources of inner healing?
Well, I think that the first step that is, very helpful for me is that I'm already believe in those forms of healing. This is something that you can't fabricate and
Right.
deliver at the same time, without discrepancies. And so I do believe that every person have the power to heal themselves. And so that's my premises. And I just work really hard with the person, try finding what is that for them, whether it's music or dancing or writing or watching movies or, talking to a friend or going for a walk or whatever it might be. We get to that point. And the tricky part is that not everybody knows that. And so there's layers and layers of, difficulties that they is not so easily accessible to them. And so that's what I spend time. I try to find for links to love. Love is also, in my opinion, something very powerful. I try to find connections to spirituality, whatever that might look like. And for some people that is, very powerful. And so I just have this menu to find out what that is. And also being really careful, because sometimes in finding those internal resources come with pain.
Yes.
And so, and it doesn't come neatly, right?
No.
It's messy. It gets to be worse before it gets better. And a lot of times, I get scared. And I wonder if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. But I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid to feel inadequate. I'm not afraid to doubt myself, because my commitment is to stay with the person and together walk that journey. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I use in my practice, and I have my own spirituality. So, I don't know nothing, and so but the right words and the right decisions come at the moment, because I have good intention. And so, I get really in touch with that, and I use it all the time to do my best.
Well, that is certainly a central teaching in terms of looking at the part where the pain, acknowledging the pain, and sometimes the pain will get worse before it gets better, because, mm-hmm. Whether it's getting more intense, at least you're paying attention to it, and that in itself makes it seem bigger. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes our fear, which is also part of that pain, right? And our fear of inadequacy, or as Nelson Mandela once said, it's our fear of greatness that also causes us pain, in terms of looking at, all right, you need to go to the center of it, and the only way through is to go through it, mm-hmm. not to avoid mm-hmm. it, not to sugarcoat it, yep. Really go through it.
Yep.
And that in itself becomes a source of power, because then you find that you survive it, that it is survivable.
Right. And I think in addition, I have to be constantly working with myself, never stop, because I do believe that you can only offer what you have.
Right.
And so if you conform with what you have today, there's no more to give tomorrow. And so So you
have to kind of continually renew yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have to continue working on my own, and my own trauma and my own history, and peel all these layers that I keep discovering, and so I can, understand myself and be more confident, and by sometimes sharing my own process, hopefully people will find their own, And so, but that I think is very instrumental. I started my education in El Salvador, and when I came here and went to PSU for a social worker degree, I was shocked that the students were not in therapy, because
yes,
in El Salvador
that used to be the standard, actually.
Yeah,
right.
We needed to be working on our own stuff along the way,
right.
and
Every
it was
therapist should
prescribed.
have a therapist, right? That used to be the standard. It's not the case anymore.
And I was like, whoa.
Healers without healing work.
Yeah.
Oh, you can't just learn this from books.
Yeah, no. In fact, I don't think that I have learned things. I learned theories and frameworks, but the skills that I have gained as a professional, it comes from working with the person in front of me. They are the teachers.
By way of final thoughts, because we have a few minutes out, how do you feel your work and the work of practitioners of color would be better supported by agencies in the community?
Oh, wow.
Short answer.
I wish they listened to us.
Yeah.
We know. We live it. We continue to live it. And we have really good points if they listen to us.
If they listen.
Yeah.
Very simple thing.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for coming and sharing with us your process and a bit of your life.
Yes. Thank you.
Your center is at 2222 Coburg Road?
Correct. Yes.
So the old behavioral health building.
Yes.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Well.
It's very ironic.
Yes. In many of my job incarnations, I've been there. So
yeah.
If you like what you've seen, email us at liveclass@lanecc.edu. Tell a friend about this show, and put DiversiTV in the subject line, and we will see you on down the road. Good healing to you. Go well, stay well.
Yeah.